So, Your Excellency, Ambassador Luis Almeida Sampaio, thank you very, very much for the honor you've given our institute by coming here today and delivering the keynote address. We see this as a first step, actually a continuation of our cooperation with Portugal, but our first step with the cooperation with you. We'd like to take the opportunity now just to ask you a few follow-up questions based primarily on your lecture, as well as some of the other issues that are close to our hearts here at the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy. First question I'd like to ask you is concerning youth development. Portugal has been hit particularly hard by the Eurozone crisis, as we all know, and youth unemployment rates are alarmingly high. How has the Portuguese government been adapting to these harsh conditions with regards to youth developments and employment?
Thank you very much for the question. It is really a very important question because it tackles the major concern that we have now when we look at the forecasts in the context of the Portuguese Adjustment and Consolidation Program. As you probably know, we are doing the program with a great sense of ownership. It is no longer the program that is imposed on us by the international financial institutions. It became our own program. So there is a very strong sense of ownership, a great determination, and a great sense of achievement because a lot of the indicators are already being seen. We are curbing public debt, we are doing fiscal consolidation, and we are, that is the most important thing, performing the structural reforms that will make the Portuguese economy at the end of the program much more sound and competitive in the global scale. But the unemployment, especially the youth unemployment, is really the indicator that derailed by comparison to the initial forecasts. And we need to curb it because this is about the future. It's about future generations. It's about winning or putting in jeopardy our future, our common future. Again, because this is an European endeavor, we are talking about the common European Union endeavor. One of the ways to try to fight youth unemployment is, of course, to change the education system. Because, as you probably know, Portugal made huge transformations after the democratic revolution back in '74. But one of the transformations that did not produce the intended effects was really the transformation of the education system. To give you a very concrete example, back in '74, by the time of the democratic revolution, only 5% of the Portuguese active population held university degrees. Today, almost every Portuguese holds a university degree. So we have high levels of academic knowledge and academic preparedness, but people are unemployed. So we need to look seriously into the examples of those countries that really, because of their education system, achieved good results in terms of fighting unemployment. And one of the countries we are looking at in a very serious way is, of course, Germany, and into the training and vocational system, the so-called dual system of education. I am not pretending that this is the key to solve all the problems, but this is a very important part and parcel of the ways and means that we need to find to curb youth unemployment.
My colleague also has a question along the same lines.
Along the lines of the European project, your Iberian partner Spain is also suffering from the effects of the global economic recession. Have the governments been cooperating to exchange ideas and best practices on how to improve the economic situation in the entire region?
Of course they have. I mean, they talk almost every day. Of course, there is a lot of coordination within the European Union, and the 27, they talk almost on a daily, regular basis. But there is a deep and an increased cooperation cross-border between Portugal and Spain for various reasons. I am going to tell you a very economic-wise reason. Spain is our main partner. And if you look at the Spanish trade, I am going to surprise you, I am sure. The Spanish trade with Portugal is bigger than the entire Spanish trade with Latin America, excluding Brazil. So if you put together all the Latin American countries that are Spanish-speaking countries in a comprehensive way, they have with Spain a trade that is inferior in sheer numbers than the trade of Spain with Portugal. And this applies to a lot of other European Union examples. If you take the trade between Germany and Austria, is bigger than the trade between Germany and China. And very few people realize that. It is a very interesting fact. So, but because of all those reasons, we have a very strong cooperation with Spain. The figures are even higher in what concerns unemployment, both average and unemployment, youth unemployment, in Spain than in Portugal. But that does not cheer us up, not only because of solidarity concerns, but also because we never experienced the levels of unemployment in Portugal that we are witnessing now. Contrary to other countries, and Spain is again an example, when some years ago the levels of unemployment were more or less what they are now, and then there was a boom in economic development and creation of jobs. But in Portugal, we have always experienced extremely low levels of unemployment. So this is really a serious concern that could put in jeopardy the social consensus that is indispensable to promote the necessary reforms. So yes, to your question, a lot of cooperation going on, and we know that Spain, as well as Portugal, are also cooperating very closely with Germany in order to adapt and to implement the dual system of education.
Well, to shift the subject a little bit, today is International Women's Day,
Indeed.
and Portugal marked its first National Salary Equality Day earlier this week. However, discrepancies in wages received by men and women still remain stark. What steps are being taken to reduce the gender-based salary gaps?
Yeah, this is one of the aspects, one of the facets for which Portugal is not given sufficient credit. Like others, I am going to give you another example. Very few people know that Portugal was the very first European country to abolish the death penalty. Very well, way before all the other European countries. And again, in what comes to gender issues, people have some stereotypes in their minds that are contradicted by statistics. We are really doing a lot more even than other countries, in the sense of creating gender equality of opportunities. Of course, salaries are an extremely important part of that. The government is determined to put the salaries of they should not be indexed to gender considerations. And so, again, that is one of the concerns, but the results are there, and it is really a dimension in which I am very proud of being the representative of Portugal.
Allow me to ask a follow-up question to that. Portuguese society has been said to be heavily permeated by stereotypes in relation to gender roles. Do you believe that cultural diplomacy can help overcome such stereotypes and change mindsets towards gender equality?
Cultural diplomacy is something that we are practicing on a wide scale and dimension already since many decades ago. If you take the example of the presence of Portugal in almost every continent, if you take the example of Brazil as a country that was very much at its inception a product of Portuguese cultural diplomacy. If you take the example of all the countries that speak Portuguese language and that are in Africa, in Asia, if you take the examples in Africa of Cape Verde, Angola, Mozambique, São Tomé, there are much more people on earth that speak Portuguese. I always say that to tease a little bit my German friends. a lot more people that speak Portuguese than people that speak German. We are a global language, and there is a cultural pattern throughout. I mean, it is not only a question of a language that is very differently represented in very different cultural mindsets, but there is a cultural pattern, a common cultural pattern, and if you look at societies that are so different than the Brazilian society or the Angolan society or the East Timor society, where you find people speaking Portuguese, and again, a multicultural dimension associated to the history and the language of Portugal, it is really what makes us not only very rich in cultural terms, but also with the capability of building bridges. There are countries within the European Union context that have their interests, culturally, economically speaking, only within the realm of the European Union concerns. I'm not going to name names, but it is obvious that there are countries that are very much inward-looking in terms of the European Union context. Portugal is exactly the opposite. Portugal would not make sense without the relationship with Brazil or with Angola. And we can provide really a plus to the European Union because we can open doors. If you take the example of German companies that are not comfortable approaching markets like the Angolan market, we can provide the key, we can provide the bridge, we can provide the necessary alliances and joint ventures to open up those markets. And that applies culturally speaking. Take the example of the Humboldt Forum that will be created here in Germany as most probably the biggest cultural endeavor of the 21st century. Of course, Portugal will have a major role in that. It would make no sense not to have. And Professor Parzinger, the president of the foundation that is leading the project of the Humboldt Forum, is the first to recognize that. He was recently in Lisbon exactly to study the forms of cooperation that would allow Portugal and the Portuguese culture to have a major role at the multicultural enterprise of the importance of the Humboldt Forum. That gives you an idea of how important we can be for cultural diplomacy.
It's actually a perfect tie into the final question regarding nation branding. As you know, the main focus of the conference that we're hosting right now is this issue of nation branding. How are countries presented abroad? How are they perceived abroad? And how does that compare to the reality? And I think that's where nation branding, cultural diplomacy can very much have an influence. So my question for you, Portugal is an extremely popular tourist destination. To what extent are efforts made to ensure that this heavy tourism is carried out in a sustainable manner? Does ecotourism form part of Portugal's nation branding strategy?
Yes, absolutely, yes. There are some very important indicators that we really should not only be very proud of, but also to announce in a much more louder way. In Portugal, everybody, but I mean everybody, it is not only in the big cities, but in every village across the country, people separate waste in the three different traditional colors, and they are very proud of doing that. When the ban of smoking in public places came, contrary to popular expectations that the Portuguese would react angrily to that, everybody immediately understood that this is a major step, not only to create a healthier environment, but also to promote Portugal as a touristical destination that is very friendly of environment and of good state of health. Much more important than your color when you come back from holidays, people coming from holidays from Portugal, Germans coming from Portugal, they exchange SMSs, and in their Facebook pages they say, they tell stories about how many kilometers they ran during their holidays in Portugal. how many kilometers by foot they did during their holidays in Portugal. So those are dimensions that highlight that eco-tourism-oriented mindset. But what is very important also is if you think about the so-called silver age or grey age tourism, Portugal is an extraordinary destination, especially because everybody in Portugal speaks foreign languages. We are a very open-minded country. One of the things that contributes to that is that we never double the movies. They are all presented in the original language in the Portuguese cinemas and the TVs, with Portuguese subtitles sometimes. But it is very important to know that everybody speaks international languages in Portugal, and we have the perfect weather conditions to have a population that could really not necessarily retire entirely in Portugal, but spend the harsher winter weeks and months that they experience in their own countries in a country like Portugal, where we should not apologize for having 365 days of sun per year in certain regions. One thing that we cannot promise is bad weather and harsh winter conditions. That we cannot promise because we cannot provide it.